Hello, guys. Welcome to another episode of our Futurecast podcast series. Today, we're with a very special guest, as always, Ram, currently the core contributor at OpenLedger. And we're going to be talking about specialized data on AI, intersection between AI and Web3. But first, why don't we give Ram a quick introduction. Ram, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe your journey getting to this point, and some of the highlights so far?
Yeah, so I got into the industry a couple of cycles back, so like around 2017. Got into more for the tech, not in terms of like a trader. But how I got into it was quite interesting because we got paid in Bitcoin while working on something around tech, and we worked with the client, like which was offshore, and they wanted to pay us, and Bitcoin was the easiest way to do that. So, and we got the payment in like few seconds. Probably it takes about a day or two through banks, and that is fascinating. Explored more on the tech, saw that there is a need for for development in this space. There are not many people who have been working on the technology side. Wanted to do some R&D, so built out a company around like a small member team over 10 people. That grew on to become like about 200 plus employees over the years. It was bootstrap, loved building that, still continue to do that. We've worked with pretty much every other enterprise in the Web3 space back then. We worked with Polygon, we've worked with Header Hashgraph, we've worked with more projects as well. Then we also, like during the 2021, like the Web 2 to Web 3 migration time, right? So we've worked with a lot of traditional brands like Walmart's India subsidiary, Flipkart. We've worked with Cadbury's. We've worked with Viacom. We've worked with Pepsi. We've worked with larger brands as well, and helped them migrate to Web 3. That taught us a lot about the bottlenecks in Web3, where and all we need to fill the gaps for traditional markets to get into the space, traditional brands and products to get into the space.
Right.
What we saw as that one of the biggest void was data, right? So we want to always see a way where we can bring data on chain or figure out use cases around data. And that started as a, sort of like a interesting R&D with in-house about a year and a half back, and then turned out to become what is like OpenLedger, right? We are one of the core contributors to OpenLedger. We want to make sure that we can figure out what best ways we can use data and make out outputs. AI is one of those use cases.
Right.
So that is sort of like the journey in from for me in Web3 and where we are today.
Awesome. So yeah, once again, the topic of today is going to be the importance of, specialized data. We're going to be talking a lot about data. And so I guess before we really dive into all of that, I think maybe for some of the audiences that are new, they may not have the technical background. Could you maybe walk us through, how important is data for AI and how typically our model trained, right? And what would you say
Yeah.
are some of the most critical factors that most influence in models' final capability when it's making inferences? So a little bit
Yeah.
of context background for the audience.
Yeah, so probably we can think of, so to make things very simple, right? I always, like this example. Some of the interesting and the most notable veterans in the AI space also gave this example, including Andrej and many more people. Always compare AI to like a brain, like a human brain, right? What you feed into that is the output that you get. So if I'm gonna go ahead and teach you more about Web3 and like DGen culture, and then talk more about why decentralization is important, and you're gonna have courses around that. You're gonna be on crypto Twitter all day. You're gonna talk, go through Reddit posts and stuff like that. Probably in a year, you would have an expert level of knowledge about Web3, maybe in the initial stages of that. And probably
Right.
as you go much more, you would sort of become like a pro in Web3 alpha, right? So that's how I see. So every human brain is capable of understanding context, and what you feed in as an additional data, it sort of becomes an expert on that. And that's how today's models are. The current foundation models have been, where they've taken like the entire context of internet data to feed into these models, to give them an understanding of the world, to give them understanding about how does David speak based on how you type to it. What's going to be your next word? What are you actually thinking? What do you actually want? So it just understands the context of the conversations that you have with it, and then based on how you fine tune it, or based on how you provide sort of let's say a RAG, it gets to know more about that particular data or content, and then processes that and gives you an output. Like how would a human brain think, right? Based on what you feed is what I get as an output. So that's why I think data is very important for any model, because model will be commoditized, compute will be commoditized. We've all seen this happening over the last a year or so. We've seen the demand of compute maybe going down in terms of training,
Right.
more on the inference side. On a longer term, you would probably see compute becoming a commodity, right? And models also, after a point of time, you would not see so many models coming out. There would be a splurge of models. There would be an expertise of models going on for the next few years, probably like 3-4 years. But after a certain time, that will become also a commodity, right? Because like how you see OSs today, um, we initially had like a boom of OSs. Every other time there was a new update to a OS in a mobile or a laptop device. But after that, some time it became a commodity. There's nothing more to really give an update. That's how AI models will become. But data would be the key, right? Data would change how a model would behave. A data, because we constantly producing data, it's a infinite source, and there is so much data in the world that has not been tapped into or explored. So I guess that's the moving piece of this entire AI ecosystem, and that's why data is so important, because based on the predictions and how we are seeing AI, if AI is going to become a general purpose technology, if AI is going to become like electricity, where it's going to be used in every other domain, every other sector, you would want it to have knowledge of each domain, right? You don't want to use like a general purpose tech for a domain specific task that you want to execute. You would want that particular tech that you're using, the model that you're using, to have a very domain specific knowledge, so that it doesn't hallucinate much. It doesn't shout out something which is useless. It actually gives you a very clear indication on what needs to be done. And for that, you would need to have like domain specific data. You would need to have that to be trained to a model for you to get like very specific outputs that you want. And that is why we think data is very important. And that is why we think specialized or domain specific data is important for all the models that will be built in the future.
Right. Awesome. So yeah, as you mentioned, I think maybe a lot of people might agree with this as well. The model is probably as good as, the data that it's been fed and trained on, right? So let's talk a little bit more about that. Maybe you can dive onto, data quality, data types, data sets. What would happen in the case where we're training a model where the data input for it is poor to begin with, right?
So we've seen this probably like very few examples in public, but I think the AI space has been viewing this for a very long time. Like OpenAI was not the first model to come out, right? There have been more models that have been launched before, but OpenAI was good because of the data it was trained for. They spent millions and millions of dollars in collecting quality data, labeling quality data, and making sure that they feed in the right data to make sure that the model performs as it does today or a year back when it was released. So I think data is the biggest moving piece, as we all know, and we've discussed about this. And when you know that data is the biggest moving piece in this ecosystem, you want to make sure that you get the highest quality of that, because the better the quality, the better the data, the better the model, right? And we've seen various firms talk about this, like Scale, which is one of the biggest data company out there. They're figuring out what are the best ways to extract the best possible data, right? And if you start to provide data which is not so useful to a model, it's just gonna become much more dumber, much more hallucinating, and in the end, you would just be wasting more resources to get an output which is not so useful, right? So I guess that's where the quality of data is important. There is multiple phases to that, right from collecting raw data to processing the data, to labeling the data, to using the best methods to train the data. There is various ways wherein which we can improve the data quality. One way that we kind of do is to make sure that we get like very high quality domain specific data, right? Because we believe not in that there will be not only like large language models, there will be specialized models that will work along with large language models. Any AI app or any AI service would use a multimodal way where they would use like an LLM or a foundation model to get a context of what is a query is, and then use a specific model, let's say like a math model, to give you an answer for a math question. So what we would require is like domain specific data. And in that domain specific data, we want to make sure that we get high quality of the domain specific data, right? We implement our own methods to do that. We provide the infrastructure for people to do that on top of us, where they can use our infra to collect the best high quality domain specific data. And as they do that, we also make sure that we provide them with the tools where the data is processed in the best methods that is possible, so that we make sure that everything happens beforehand before you actually train a model, right? You optimize as much as possible before you train a model, and once the model is trained, we also provide them with the evaluation tools that is necessary to ground the model, to evaluate the model better, so that when it goes as an actual output, you make sure that it is trained with the highest quality data possible, and it performs the best as much as possible. So that is sort of where we see as why data,
Right.
health and data quality is very important.
Gotcha. Awesome. So I know you mentioned this a little bit briefly. Is how do traditional LLMs, big guys like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, where do they source their data from? A big part of it I heard is from web scraping, but surely there's other sources or means for them to get those data, right?
Yeah. So there is definitely multiple ways to do that, right? But the first biggest way, or to the first phase of any model that we've seen, like any foundation model, is to train it with internet scrape data, where you get a
Right.
large amount of internet data and then you train a model with that. 99% of that data is garbage. Most of it is useless, but that's all fine because you're just going to give the model as much as context as possible, as much as understanding as possible of the world. Right now, it just understands English better. Now it just gets to read you, gets to know you much better when you ask certain questions. Now, once you're done with that, then you start feeding it high quality labeled data. Again, they would start with like internet data, right? Now, you are specifying it and teaching it and how a model should work, how a particular data is, and what kind of data it is. Like, let's say, what is a cow? What's a car? So you're teaching it much more very specific knowledge. Then you go much more deeper. Then you go much more specialized data or domain data, where you start to teach it like, let's say, programming languages, right? We've seen various models that have come out which understand programming very well,
Right.
which basically they've trained them with code descriptions, actual code and documentations of, let's assuming like 30 top languages, right? Now, that's a very domain specific need that has been fed into a model. So I guess
Right.
that's like the ways where all these models perform, right? But it all starts with like internet data, and then it goes into like domain specific data and much more deeper. Sure, like whether they use the best practices to do that is an argument that we could have a separate topic on its own about that. But again, I think that the best steps that they're taking forward is to go much more closer, work with like in our case, like when we talk about domain specific data, like OpenAI and all these cases are also going behind domain specific data, and they've approached universities, they've approached various other players out there who can give very specific data for them, so that these models have high quality information for them to be trained on. So, and we've seen examples of that. We've had conversations with people who have like large amount of like legal data, for example,
Right.
and they've gone ahead and sold that to these large model companies. But only the negative side of that practice is that they consume data as it is, right? And when the models go ahead and buy out the data from you, you are never rewarded back again. It's just a one-time sale of the data that you own. The businesses never make revenue back again. Initially, it'll look very lucrative, like you probably get millions and millions of dollars for the data that you own, which you think is it's good money. But after a long time, you become useless, right? Your data is just sold once, and then the a model company would never come back to you because they can create like derivative versions of the data and they would never need you back. So that is one thing that we want to make as well. We want to make sure that we have a business model where businesses come forward, contribute data, or subject matter expert come forward and
Mm.
contributes data. We want to make sure that there is a recurring need for them to come, for us to use them, and recurring revenue for them to make as well, where the data is
Mm.
not sold as it is. The data is converted as an intelligence. The data is given out as a model, so that every time this model makes money, you have a share of that. That's where we
Right.
bring in attribution, and I'm sure that we'll talk more about that. And that is why that's some methods that we follow, where we want to make sure that we create this flywheel where we
Right.
have data providers come forward, use our platform, contribute data, build models on top of us, make that model available for agents and apps to use. And as they use it, they get paid back. As they get paid back, they see this as a revenue model and start contributing more and more data and more high quality data. And we have our own methods to actually show to people in our protocol to see how their data has been useful in the model. What was the
Right. Right.
influence of the data in the model, and how it was impacting their revenue, and how could actually probably like contribute better to get paid more, or contribute better to just make much more difference in the data that they provided.
Right, right. So going back to the data, I think maybe it's first. Let's establish just how important or difficult it is right now in the business context for them to retrieve or have this kind of data, right? How difficult is it to get domain specific data? You mentioned a few of the sources. They're going to university settings, there's web data and all of that. But for a wide variety of the industry, would you say the data problem is still a big problem in order to get high quality data, or at least a pipeline of that?
Uh, I guess it starts with awareness, right? Awareness, or sort of like a business model. Because, like, for example, you're now seeing various newspapers and articles out there, where they've started to sue all these model companies because they all these models just went ahead and scraped internet data, got these
Mm.
headlines and the content, so whatever that is available before the paywall, right? And
Right.
they've now seen that, okay, these models have used our content and we've not gotten anything out of it. No, you've not been attributed for that. And
Right.
that is kind of giving them an awareness right now to say, like, okay, let's figure out a way where we can start monetizing this data. Now it's just much more easier. Like, so let's say someone is
Mm.
building a new model today. It's just much more easier for them to reach out to these newspaper articles and say that I'm going to build a model. I'll pay you for that. Why didn't you actually go
Mm.
ahead and give me that data? And now you would get the data at much easier way. So I guess it
Mm.
comes down to awareness and actual impact that this industry is going to create. How,
Mm.
like, you've seen this happen always whenever there is a technology shift, right, from social media to internet. No one cared about social media. There were people like shouting that needs to be on Facebook, or everyone needs to be on other social media posts, like stuff that is out there, but no one really cared about it. And like 5 years later, every corporates is on social media, right, promoting their product on social media. Same
Right.
happened during internet era. Everyone thought they would, everyone said that you should have, we probably have a .com, and no one really cared about it. And then after the bubble and after everything, it actually stabilized, and everyone has a website right now. So I guess
Right.
it always happens when there's a technology shift that is changing the world. And once there is demand, when there's the awareness, I think collecting data becomes much more easier, or much more approachable. And it evolves as the year goes, right? So even like if you take a look at the industry, right? Let's just talk about like Web3 industry. About a year back, we were all talking about GPU as a problem. There were all GPU companies which were out there. No one talked about data. No one really cared about any kind of data company that was being built and like which was contributing to AI. But now it's all about data, because now people understood that data really makes changes to a model, or
Right.
how an AI service performs, right? So it just again comes back to the awareness and the business demand that is there. So as this awareness goes, I'm sure that platforms like us, we put in our efforts to create awareness as well. And once people see there are protocols and tools that are available, that would let them go ahead and contribute data and make the data much more available. And that is one thing that we are also working towards, right? We want to make sure that we provide all the necessary tools and the product that is available for any kind of proprietary data that is out there from a business or a subject matter expert, to provide that data, get easily onboarded, and figure out a way to monetize the data, and constantly use that platform to make a business out of it, right? So
Right.
that's what we are working on. So yeah, so that's one way that you would probably figure out ways where how data can be useful and how we can
Right.
data analyze.
And I think from the consumer perspective, right, I saw a couple posts on LinkedIn a while back. I remember when they introduced the AI kind of like summary tool at the end of every post, and then people were talking about how these platforms are pretty much taking a lot of the user data on there for these AI toolings, and there was awareness starting from that point where people start to pay attention a little bit more on how these companies, big tech companies, are leveraging their data in that sense. So what would you say, going back to the conversation about LLMs, right, are some of the advantages and maybe disadvantages about large language models? And you did mention about SLMs. Maybe you could get into a little bit about that as well, and the comparison between, large language models like ChatGPT, Claude, versus more niche, specialized language models, which you guys are working on right now.
Yeah, so I would not say that there is, like, we're not against of any kind of foundation models or LLMs,
Right.
because I think there is this famous line by Andrich where he goes on to say that LLMs are like OSs, and then smaller models or like specialized models or like apps on top of that, right?
Mm,
Where I think, as he mentioned, right, LLMs will be like the bedrock of any AI services out there. Smaller language models will just get you the answer much more efficiently, much more
mm,
quicker, and much more precise. And that is what we all want, right? We want the AI to be useful. Now is just bunch of fun queries and like entertainment for us, right? I'm just gonna play with it to get my content better. I'm gonna just play with it to just do a math problem, or like ask about my like day-to-day issues, right? So I'm not gonna like really use AI for something much more serious, like for example trading using AI, or managing my governance with AI or something like that. So if you're going to use, like as we've been discussing, if you're going to use AI in very specific domains, and you're going to be using AI in areas where you would see like very monetary impact and decision-making impact, you want to make sure that AI has the right output that comes in, right? It has less hallucinations, and it is much more precise than what it is today. And one way to achieve that is to have like very specific models which are fine-tuned for a very specific purpose, right? It's just simple logic. Like the current models today, LLMs have large amount of data. So if you ask it a question, it's just gonna process for a very long time. You're gonna waste a lot of energy, and then it's gonna give you an answer which is as much as wide as possible, because that's the knowledge it has, right? And you need to do like really long prompt engineering to get the answer that you want.
right.
But if we have a model where it works along with the large language model to get a context, and then you have the model goes ahead and has a very specific data and that is fine-tuned with, and you ask the question to that, it can give you answer very precisely based on the knowledge it has, and it has a very limited knowledge. It's going to be very specific with its answer. And I guess that's what we all need, right? And that is what we are envisioning as well. Like for example, people are building like very interesting stuff on top of us. There is in closed beta, of course, we have like a solidity data net which is being built on top of it, which is basically they're collecting solidity data to train like a solidity model. So co-pilots can be built on top of that, and you can build like an auditing agent on top of that. But you can't build, a trading agent on top of it, because it do not just have the knowledge to do that. It's gonna be very specific, do only dev-related jobs. So that is what I think is the best way to approach. Not just go with one blanket approach saying that one model fits all. I think there's going to be like multiple models, like swarm of models, which will work with one large language model to give you an output, and
Right.
that is what I see.
Right. And do you see the case where there's also going to be, many different, specialized smaller language model competing for the same domain? Because I think I may have seen a couple projects that are talking about, SLMs as well. I guess from the business perspective, they would then potentially have multiple choice between different SLMs that they're contributing their data to. Would you see that potential?
Yeah, I'm sure. Like if you, we've all seen this. Most of the AI-based arenas out there, which figure out how these models are performing. If you take a look at any particular topic, like for example, we were analyzing around like Arabic-based models, right? Because we had this discussion with the Dubai government, and they wanted to build a model which understands Arabic much better. And like most of the current large language models do not understand Arabic, right? Are not very efficient with Arabic. And we were researching about this, and we found like there are like 10 models out there, which is just being built on Arabic as a knowledge. And they compete really well because the score that they have is very competing to one another. But each one has its own benefits and preference, right? So I'm sure that there will be like multiple models that will be on a particular domain. There'll be domains where not many people have that data or knowledge to actually build a model around that. So that will also happen. But it just ends up like the better the model, the better it performs, and the better context it has, and the better latest information it has is just going to be used by people much more than other models out there. And that's what has been happening, right? Even though like ChatGPT has been closed, it has been a closed ecosystem. We all want to use ChatGPT for certain use cases because it's just much better in certain things, and because they have better data and better models. But there has been like certain use cases where ChatGPT has not been really good, like video models or like media models and stuff like that, which there are other models which perform much better. So I guess that's how people make choices based on the need and based on how it performs as well. They will make.
Right. Awesome. So yeah, I think for the next bit, I want to get into a little bit more into what you guys are actually building. And, we're going to get into all the different components. So we've kind of skimmed, on the surface on what you guys were kind of doing at OpenLedger, but maybe could you share with us a little bit more deep dive into how it actually works and how you guys are actually fairly rewarding data contributors in a way that, the system can't be gamed, right? I could imagine scenarios where there are people that could be inputting a lot of different data that's random, that's arbitrary, not related. But how do you guys protect yourself against cases like that? But I guess you can start, telling us a little bit about how OpenLedger works underneath the hood.
No, absolutely. So thanks for asking that question. Happy to share what we do. So OpenEdge is a data blockchain for AI. And we let people build like specialized models on top of us because that's the best thing that you can get out data. You can build a model which you need for the particular data that you received. So there are three parts to us. The middle, or sort of like the center point, is creating models, specialized models. And in order to create like a specialized model, like you would need like specialized data. And that's where the data nets come in, where we let people contribute data to our data nets. And these are like, it could be around any particular topic. Someone could build a data net around Solidity, as I told you. There could be one who's just building a data net around like Web3 Alpha, which just has Web3 off-chain data and on-chain data. And then one could build around IPs. One could build around, let's say, gaming. I think it could be any random topic that people could decide that they think is useful and start collecting data for that. And once the data is collected, think of this to be like a repository. You start collecting data on top of this. And then after you're done with that, you go ahead and fine-tune models on top of that. You either can convert that as a RAG and provide it as a RAG with any open source model that is hosted on our platform. Or if you believe that this has to be fine-tuned because a large amount of data and it has better context and then better output if it's been fine-tuned, then you can use our tooling to go ahead and fine-tune models with that. So that's what is sort of like the first part to our platform, right? That's the most important aspect. And once we have models, these models are hosted on our platform, and these models can be claimed. Whoever is building that, they can own that. And these models are then available for apps and agents to consume. They basically infer on these models to get better outputs and use it for their own purpose. Like for example, if someone has built a Web3 Alpha model, a trading agent can probably use it and make better decisions, right? With the Solidity model, you can have like an audit agent, which could do much better auditing. So these are like existing agents today. Even though it's a trend and everyone is talking about it, it's like really fun to look at. But the existing agents are not at its full potential. Like they're being very dumb. They just post on social media. But agents are much more bigger, right? They could literally replace humans, and that's what we're working for. We are building the platform that is required to build like purpose driven agents, which can go ahead and have models to be accessed, which are like domain specific models, and these purpose driven agents can use these domain specific models to execute very specific work, which we don't see now happening. So that's sort of like our vision, where we want these models to be useful, and we want these models to be better, so that agents or apps that use these models have a better inference and
Right.
perform much better than how they are today. So yeah, so that's what we're building.
Got it. Awesome. So backtracking a little bit here, we kind of start off with the data contributors, and then that's going to go into these data nets, right? So these data nets, are they separate blockchain? How do they work? And from an individual perspective, like how are new data nets created for more specialized categories? You guys maybe mentioned before.
Yeah, so we are going testnet soon, so we will be announcing all this with proper documentations, which you can definitely take a look at it. But I'll take a stab at it. Maybe I can give you some information. So like think of each data net to be like a contract. We are a layer 2, so think of each data net where you start a contract, and you mint a contract, and then this contract you can have specific rules on what kind of data you want to collect. You can specify the terms and conditions, how the data has to be contributed. You can write a rule engine,
Right.
and then you could also determine how much of these block rewards that you want to distribute as well, and then you could go ahead and let people contribute data to this data net, which is basically stored on an off-chain database, and the hash of that is stored on-chain. In order to make sure that the data that we collect is not useless, it's
Right.
not garbage, right? We make sure that we provide that rule engine to be validated by operators. So instead of forming our own validator set, we didn't want to bootstrap and do that. So we're working with eigenlayer. So we use eigenlayer AWS operators to basically run these rule engines, where every contract basically uses these validators to validate the data before they have been collected and then put on chain. So
Right.
once the data is on chain, you basically now tagged a user or a business contribution to a particular data, both of it on chain. Now I have a track of who contributed what kind of data, and then this is sort of like collected in the data net, as I told you, like a repository.
Right.
And this could be any kind of data net. Each data net has its own contract, and each contract has its own collection of data that is there. Once that is done, once we have enough amount of data, you can go ahead and now convert that as a RAG, basically vectorize embeddings, which can be provided as a RAG to existing models, as I told you. And then you could basically use that model for any apps or agents that needs it. Other way is basically you start fine tuning these open source models as hosted on a platform with the data that you collected. We have the tools that is necessary for you to process the data, clean the data, and train the model with that particular data. And once you've trained it, you could ground it, you could start evaluating this model better. And once you've evaluated the model, then you can host it on a platform, again making it available for agents and apps to use. And that's sort of like how the data net is used, and data is collected and then trained with models, and then that's how it's being accessible by agents or apps.
Right. So it's more than just, the data contribution side, but it's also the application side and toolings and all of that in between to help developers kind of leverage
Yeah.
your ecosystem. So going back to particularly about, the operators, for them to, ensure legitimacy of the contribution, is that kind of a manual task that these operators would have to do?
Yeah. It's a rule engine, right? They don't have to do anything manually. They're not gonna like go through each data and figure out like
Right.
whether this is the right data that is given. Think of it that as a simple like an SQL rule engine, which they would just run, and it has particular rules that needs to be followed. If it gets gets approved, and it gets stored, or if the data is rejected, as simple as that. So And we would be showing that in our test. So once our test deadlines, you will be able to test it out and see how it works as well.
And your test net is going to be up in a couple days. Is that right?
So it's a phased test net. So we would start with sort of like, so before like we talk about this test net, right? One important thing that we do is like, if someone is building like models on top of us, is going to use our infrastructure to build models, and is going to collect like domain specific data. One thing that happens with building fine tuning models is that you would need like certain data where that if you collect the data and you don't have like enough data around a particular topic and you need to fill in gaps over there, usually the data is available on the internet, right? And what we want to do is sort of like have like sort of like an internet pool of data. So you think of this as sort of like your Wikipedia that you want to access to get certain information. And if it's not available there, then you go to this domain specific knowledge base that is there with these data nets, use that to fine tune. Or go the other way around. You basically use these domain specific data nets and you wanted certain information which is not available, you're not able to receive that. You access this internet pool to then fine tune. So that's what we want to start with. We want to start with this data pool of internet data. So that's our first phase of our test net. That's how we want the product to be built as well. And we want the community to contribute as we build this product. So the first phase is to create this data intelligence layer, like a DI layer, where people contribute data by basically letting us access their bandwidth, where we use that bandwidth to consume internet data, right? And once you've consumed internet data, that it's raw data, it's not useful as it is.
Right.
What you need to do is to actually process that. So we use your GPU again of your devices to go ahead and create synthetic versions of that data, basically augment that data to make it available for training. So that's our first phase, where for testnet is basically a node of this data intelligence layer where people download this node and we use your bandwidth to basically consume data. And then we use the GPU again to basically synthesize that and make it much more augmented. And we create this data pool. And once that is done, then we open up in a phased manner our data nets where people can start hosting models and then collecting specific data and then start using them as RAG or start fine tuning them as well. So that is sort of like how the testnet progresses. And hopefully in a couple of months, we will let people make these make these models available, which then can be accessed by apps or agents.
Got it. So let's talk a little bit more about, I think something you mentioned along the way is proof of attributions, right? So how do you, from the model when they're making inferences, be able to pinpoint, what data pieces or contributions specifically it's drawing from? And that's also how you guys are able to figure out, which contributor should be more compensated because their data is obviously more valuable, has a larger impact in terms of the inferences. So how does all that work?
Yeah. So like attribution is very important because, I think one of the biggest positive aspects of Web3 is bootstrapping, right? One of the biggest reasons why decentralized GPUs was made a huge impact and was quite big is because you are going to let an SME or a single user who's just playing along with AI to use GPUs at much, much more lower cost and much more accessibility compared to what these centralized players provide today, right?
Right.
I think this is one of the biggest plus points and aspects of Web3 that I love about, because it just lets you bootstrap and gives you freedom for innovations to happen. In terms of data, if you want to bootstrap data, right? If you want to let people contribute data and you want to do that in a way where, it is a cycle, it's a loop that continues to happen. You want to make sure that attribution is given back to the data providers, because for a domain specific model, I'm not talking about like foundation models, because foundation models go through a lot of stuff. There is internet data, better ways to actually train a model. Training takes a huge effort. The model itself is a huge effort. Data is one of those components in that. But when you're actually building like specialized models, the biggest impact in that specialized model is the data that is provided, because that's going to be the biggest changer there. So
Right.
if data is going to be the biggest changer and that's going to move the needle, then you want to make sure that you attribute back to the data contributors.
Right.
There should be ways where they're rewarded fairly, as any other player that gets rewarded in the process. And in this process, when you want to make sure that the attribution happens, the attribution has to be verifiable and on-chain. And that is what we are working on, where we show the entire provenance of how the data is collected, right from the user wallet to the data that is provided, which is tagged along with that user wallet, to what processes goes through into training, which models are consuming this data, which models are basically fine-tuned with this data. And if it's fine-tuned, who's basically inferencing in these models. And if it's being inferenced, then we show much more details on how the inference happens and so on. So, and through all of this process, we make sure where your data started until where it traveled. And we make sure that if there is any revenue that is made, it is attributed back to the data provider.
Right.
And we have that proof launching. And how we do that is basically is the innovation that is there, and it's a research that we've been working on. And a lot of people talk about attribution. A lot of people should talk about it because that's one of the most important aspect. But not sure on how well they're going to execute it, right?
Right.
And we have been working on this over the last year or so, and we will announce soon about that. I think that'll give you more idea about how the attribution works, to very specific information of how we provide attribution and why our attribution is different from most other people, what they do, and why that kind of like tags people in the ecosystem, right from the data provider to the model creator to the agent. It benefits all of these three players, and we'll be announcing more information about that. So yeah, so that's more to come, and there's a separate announcement around that, and there's a separate
Right.
product around that as well.
So I guess, going back to the focus of blockchain and Web3 as well, do you think any of this, what you guys are building, would have been possible without blockchain in between facilitating a lot of that, fairness, proof of attribution, and so much more like that?
Yeah, so see, I personally believe that decentralization is to be used only at places it's required. Just because everyone is passionate about decentralization, we should not like use it in every other aspect that is there, right? You don't want to decentralize everything that is there. Certain things are better off operating in a centralized manner because it's just much more efficient. We all want efficient systems to be used. Um,
Right.
there is certain things which can be done just off chain, and that's what we do. We don't do everything on chain in our platform. But like, for example, when you want to reward people, when you want to make sure that attribution is given back to the right contributors, for them to trust this platform, they're not going to trust the humans that are involved in this, right? Because there is no actual contractual obligations here, because it's a permissionless platform. And data providers could be anywhere. They could be across the globe. It could be in Africa, they could
Right.
be in Australia, they could be in US. What is the best way to actually bring them all together? Like, bring in code as a law, right? So that's what blockchain provides. It lets you have the verification on chain. You're able to prove on code that this is how your data was used and this is how you are going to get rewarded back. That's one of the most important aspect that has to be on chain. That's what we're doing. So why proof of attribution is on chain is because you want to make sure that people can trust the system, trust the code, and not worry about that. So they can go ahead and provide their proprietary
Right.
data, make sure that it's not misused, make sure that if their data is being actually implemented and being used in the model, they're getting benefited for that, and they could see the process on chain. They can see the provenance, and never worry about it being misused, right? So in order to bring that trust is where we use blockchain, and
Awesome. Awesome.
that's what I believe.
Awesome. So yeah, we've kind of come to the end here. We cover a lot about, starting from data to what you guys are doing specifically with SLM, how your model works with proof of attribution and all of that. So
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of excitement around AI, Web3, and of course the intersection. But for a lot of builders out there, especially some of our audience as well that are new, do you have any advice for them in general in innovating in this space and just building in the intersection between Web3 and AI? Tips and advice from you.
Yeah, I would say there are a lot of players who've achieved much more than what I have done to actually give advice. But my 2 cents always is like perseverance, right? And especially in this particular industry, when there's a lot of ups and downs, when the market volatilities is influence the entire development sector of this industry, um, have perseverance. I think that's very important. And we all have been in the industry for quite long to know that that's the one of the biggest, as things that you have to have within you. So I would say just have perseverance, have a purpose on what you're building and why you're building that. Um, money will come, but you should have a purpose. So that's my 2 cents to the industry.
Awesome. Gotcha. Thank you very much for taking the time. I hope you guys in the audience learned something new today. Lots of great content that we cover. Any final takeaways from you, Ram? Any final
Thanks for
remarks?
having me here. So I hope you talk more about AI. Just educate people about AI. I think AI is going to change the world, as everyone knows that. And if that's going to happen, we want to make sure that everyone is aware, right from a kid to a grandma. So I think we all should be aware. If we are aware, we would do what is the best for us. And we were not much aware when social media happened or internet happened. And we've been falling behind on various other things as well. So as much as awareness we create, better products and better innovation happens, and safer innovations happen. So I hope you guys talk more about this. And thanks for having me here.
Awesome. Thank you, Ram. That's it for us. We'll see you guys next time.